No, there is no credible evidence of slavery in China.
The Chinese invented gunpowder, so let's start there. Second of all, I'm gonna need all the xenophobic Westerners to come up with a China bad reference that's not Tiananmen Square, please. Because last I checked, that happened when I was 4 years old, and now I have wrinkles and gray hair.
Hello amazing viewer, excited to have you once more at Comfort for Life. I bring to you compilations of TikTok and Red Knot videos for educational purposes. You're new here, why don't you smash that subscribe button? And to my returning viewers, I really love and appreciate you.
For most Chinese, including myself, CCP, CPC sounds the same. It's English. It's another way to say this party's name, CPC, CCP. But when they realize that you guys intentionally choose the wrong one to call CPC, Chinese people will be pissed.
Today on Reasons the United States Lies to You About China, houses are for living in, not for speculation. This is a quote from Xi Jinping in 2016 that became the guiding principle of the Chinese Communist Party regarding the real estate sector. China has a 90% home ownership rate in cities, and in more rural areas, it's closer to 100%. Starting in 2010, they enacted something I've been calling for here for years, and I had no idea they'd already done it in China. They make it harder to buy your second house and even harder to buy your third house because they want everyone to be able to buy their first one, the one that matters. And if you're an American, you're totally not going to believe this. Houses depreciate in value over time. A used house costs less than a new house because, again, it's a thing for someone to live in, not an investment for the rich. Consider this. China is roughly the same size as the United States and has more than 3 times the population, but they have a 90+% home ownership rate, while the United States has a 65% and dropping home ownership rate. Because in the United States, the primary function of housing is for speculation, not for living in.
Guys, this is one of the coolest things I've seen all week. In China, there's traveling courts that bring justice straight to remote communities. Check out this video. And that is just one of the many institutions that exist in China in order to take into account the people's will. This is how they realize the whole process people's democracy. In other words, the form that socialist democracy takes in China. If you take all of these institutions into account and actually study how they function, you cannot come out of that research project without thinking that China is infinitely more democratic in the sense of giving people a greater say over their life and their word and their sentiment much more power over everyday affairs than any European or Western country is. If you want to learn more about how China works, the different stages of socialism with Chinese characteristics, how the government is structured, how the party works, its relationship to the state, make sure to check out Roland Bohr's book, Socialism with Chinese Characteristics.
I don't know where you get your news from. TikTok? TikTok? Think about TikTok. Which government is stealing from which government? You are on TikTok.
America, are you watching this? Can we do this? Please?
First of all, it's CPC, not CCP. Second of all, I'm way more progressive than CPC. I don't think CPC care about Hawaii. I want you to free Hawaii. It's wrong because you overthrow the Hawaii queen and you annex Hawaii. That's wrong. I want you to free Hawaii. I want you to free Puerto Rico. You won the Spanish War and you control Philippines and Puerto Rico. Philippines gets independence because Philippines deserve it. Puerto Rico also needs its independence because Puerto Rico deserve it, just like Philippines. Free Hawaii, free Puerto Rico, free Guam, free Okinawa. Just because you want Okinawa as your military base doesn't mean Japan could occupy that country. I don't think CPC won't say that. I'm not CPC. That's why I'm saying that. Free Hawaii, free Puerto Rico, free Guam, free Okinawa.
Okay, first of all, Chinese invented gunpowder, so let's start there. Second of all, I'm gonna need all the xenophobic Westerners to come up with a China bad reference that's not Tiananmen Square, please. Because last I checked, that happened when I was 4 years old, and now I have wrinkles and gray hair. So if that's the last example that you can come up with for how bad the Chinese government is, I'm gonna need you to rethink your whole propaganda strategy. And I'm actually ashamed to admit this, but I just recently learned that the tank man at Tiananmen Square didn't even actually die. He just stood in front of that tank and then walked away and lived his life. It's always been strongly implied, if not outright said, that the tank gunned him down and ran him over just after that photo was taken. But that is not the case. And if you don't know which picture I'm talking about, I'm sure you do. But if you don't, here it is. It is literally 2026, and still, anytime you try to be well, it seems like the Chinese government's, doing some good things, you're well, tell that to the guy who stood in front of the tank at Tiananmen Square. That happened in 1989, you fucking losers. Get some new material.
No, there is no credible evidence of slavery in China. But since you're asking about modern day slavery, do you know about Angola prison? Angola prison started life as Angola Plantation, a plantation where enslaved Africans picked cotton until 1865, when the 13th Amendment freed the slaves. The only problem for them was the 13th Amendment created a carve-out saying, except for punishment for crimes, slaves are free. So Louisiana, along with the rest of the South, enacted black codes and Jim Crow laws in order to re-enslave emancipated Africans and sent them back into enslavement at Angola Plantation under a different name, penal servitude and convict leasing. Until 1901, when the state of Louisiana purchased the plantation and turned it into what we know today as Angola Prison. It's referred to as the Alcatraz of the South and called a place you go to die because the overwhelming majority of inmates at Angola are black, and among black inmates, 95% of them will never be released because most of them are in there under Louisiana's draconian 3 strikes law on things as benign as weed. And they are literally picking cotton. Antebellum slavery is alive and well in the United States, but you know where it's not a thing, where there is no credible evidence of slavery? China. Most of the absolute worst things you've heard about China are actually true of the United States and not of China. It's called projection. The main reason the United States lies so much about China and spends so much propaganda against them is that the Chinese government actually works for their people. And one of the main reasons China's government's been able to continue doing amazing things for their citizens, like completely eradicating poverty, is that they execute corrupt billionaires and politicians who steal from the people. China has executed 14 people with a net worth of at least 1 billion yuan, or $155 million, in the last 8 years as part of Xi Jinping's anti-corruption drive. The most recent to be executed was Bai Tianhui, the former general manager of China Hurong International Holdings, a subsidiary of China Hurong Asset Management, a state-owned enterprise that was set up to deal with bad loans from state banks during the Asian financial crisis. Now, this is a state-owned enterprise that functions similarly to TARP in the US in the 2008 financial collapse, or to the PPP loans during COVID. It essentially bails out companies that are failing. They have a ton of money at their discretion, so it is a magnet for corruption. So corrupt businessmen who are interested in their own personal gains were going to buy Tianwei with bribes in order to get much larger sums of money from Horong International Holdings. And unlike in the United States, where that kind of corruption is normalized and we expect as taxpayers to bail out corporations who were fucking the people to begin with, China did the necessary thing to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Father shoots daughter dead. Yeah, they were arguing about Donald Trump. She basically was telling her Dad, I mean, he's been awful and terrible and been convicted of attacking women. What if he attacked me, Dad? Well, he didn't want to hear anything about it. So much so that he shot her dead.
No women in China. Yeah, right. Not women. 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 Yeah, we only have one gender.
Does China carry out mass surveillance campaigns on Chinese people? No. Does China arrest Chinese people who jaywalk and send them to prison? No. Does China censor the entirety of the internet to make sure that Chinese people can never know what's going on in the outside world? No. Nope. Regarding the surveillance campaigns and like the cameras and stuff, there's actually this part of Chengdu that I was staying in for the first couple days that I was here. And the like Didi drivers, which is kind of like Uber or whatever, your rideshare app, they know where there aren't cameras on traffic stops so that they can ignore the traffic stop. And the like motorcycle drivers prioritize going through those areas to be able to get to where they're going. I also kind of felt like people imply that there were like cameras on every corner. Personally, I feel like there are more cameras in the US. Like there's cameras literally right outside my house. I'm currently in Beijing and there's no cameras outside of my hotel. And the jaywalking thing is literally like the worst piece of propaganda I've heard. Probably like the funniest one too, because to cross the street, you actually have to jaywalk. If you've ever seen videos of Vietnam where like there's those like motorcycles where you like have to like cross and like pray that like people will see you and you have to move kind of slow so that people drive around you, that also happens in China. And the way that I've been doing, so the way that I do travel in general is I just copy the locals. So whatever they're doing, if they're crossing the street, I'm crossing the street. If I see a bunch of local people eating at a restaurant, I'm going to go and eat at that restaurant. The first thing that happened on the first day that I was here, when I literally arrived, was somebody waiting because they saw that I looked a little confused about how to cross the street because it was literally so busy. There was never not traffic there. So when I crossed the street, they were walking and they were looking behind them to make sure that I could see them so that I would cross the street at the same time as them. I don't know, I just knew the vibes. And the light was red and we jaywalked together. Regarding the firewall, I will also say that every single hotel that I've been to, every single like restaurant that I've checked into, and even the instructions on the official Alipay website, which is where you like go and you pay for everything in China, tells you and gives you instructions on how to get a VPN. The Great Firewall is to keep American propaganda out. In fact, I can watch like the news from Mexico on my hotel TV. I can also watch like CNN, Times, New York, blah blah whatever, with no problem. I think the other thing about it that's really interesting about this like censorship sort of idea that like somebody said in my comments a long time ago, but I've seen this comment multiple times still to this day, that like Chinese and American people are the most propagandized people on earth. Chinese people are not propagandized. Chinese people are not propagandized. They are some of the most critical of their government. I hear them in public talking about their government and literally just discussing like whether or not something works. They're extremely shrewd and they are really like very moral about like everything. So if they think something is unjust or unfair, they expect it to be fixed fucking immediately. They have the government on their toes. Like, they are not fucking playing with the government, okay? The American public are sheep. They are human cattle. Whenever a Chinese person has a physical issue with some infrastructure, they call up their local politician, and that politician will fix that as quickly as possible, depending on how much it'll impact daily life. And I saw this happen in real time in Chengdu. There was like some kind of an accident, and there was like a post or something that got knocked over. Within hours, they had somebody out there fixing it. I have a post outside of my house that is in a heavily transited area that constantly causes accidents. And for the entire 2 years that I've lived at that house, it has never once been fixed, nor has the infrastructure in that area been developed so that these accidents don't continue to happen. I don't think people really appreciate that not only are Chinese people not being propagandized or censored, they are so indifferent to what the United States is doing because they have so much hard power. And that's the vibe that I get here. Like, I don't think Chinese people really give a fuck about what's going on at all in the West. The other thing is that they have everything at their disposal in a much better, much safer capacity here in China. So I just don't think they care. I don't think they give a fuck about what's going on in the rest of the world. I don't know, just some things to think about as somebody who's been here for 5 days and has noticed the immediate changes that happen from my hotel window.